Welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the egos of all the people at the table. I'm one of your hosts, DM Neal, aka Joke Maniac.
And I am your other host, DM Mitch, aka No AKAs Needed.
I am your other host for this episode, DM Chris, aka Chris.
That's it.
And today we have the third and final set of top 10s. The thing you all know and love so much. And hopefully you will know and love all these wonderful ideas that Mitch has.
Yeah.
I feel like it's harder and easier for him as the third person going because
I certainly had more time.
Yeah. And hopefully Chris and I stole all your ideas. So hopefully we made it harder.
There was one of them, that's for sure. We'll talk about that.
Yeah. But before we do that, this was our 500th review on Apple Podcasts. So this one holds a really special place in all of our hearts. It's entitled Number 500? By Messiah Moose. And it says, took me too long to write this. Been listening for years. Sorry. I began this podcast soon after a certain online campaign relit my fire for D&D. I was going to start a club with students because, no one to play with, and was a bit overwhelmed and frankly not up to the task creatively. You folks not only have excellent ideas, but encourage and inspire creativity as well. I still feel like I fall short more often than not, but every episode has something you can lift, drop into a session, and create something memorable. Thanks. Well, thank you, Messiah Moose, for being our 500th Apple Podcast review. We're super thrilled that you've been listening for so long. It's awesome.
Man, all I can think of is Bullwinkle, the character of Bullwinkle.
Oh, yeah.
Dressed up as Jesus with that name. So.
And all I can think is Invader Zim. Say Moosey Fate. Say Moosey Fate.
I didn't think anything about Moose other than they're from Alaska and stuff, so you guys got me beat creatively. One last thing before we jump into the meat. Friends, be sure to get questions in because next week is our AMA episode that will be coming out. We want to have as many questions as possible so that you guys can get to know us, the hosts of the Dungeon Master Block, as much as possible. So be sure to get those in. You can email them to us. We would love to be able to have those read to us and answer them on the upcoming episode.
I realized later, after we put out this calling, that it's really an AUA, right? Because it's Ask Us Anything, but that just doesn't roll off the tongue.
Doesn't roll off the tongue as well. Yeah, but what does roll off the tongue as well is it's time for the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meats?
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys.
All right, well, here we are in the juicy, delectable portion of the episode, the meat. And today, Mitch, you are bringing us a top 10 list of campaign ideas, things that people can put into their homebrew campaigns or just any campaign in general. So start us off with your number 10.
A lot of my top 10s are actually what I realized they're kind of like settings for their settings or even like campaign worlds. And so my last one, my 10 is entitled, because with my 10 it's got to always have a fancy title, Sick Turtle. So the idea is there's all that mythology that we have in the real world that some religions believed that the world itself rested on the back of some sort of mythical creature. The constant is like the turtle is the one that people think of. But so if your homebrew world rests on the back of some mythical creature, whether it's a turtle or it's a giant ox or whatever it is, this whole idea is that creature starts to get like fatally sick. Like they are starting to die from some sort of illness. And if the whole entire world rests on the back of this creature, then in my mind, I think that would start to affect the world in general. Like maybe the trees, all the plant life would start dying. Maybe all the animals that eat the plants would start getting sick. And then all the carnivores would start getting sick from eating those animals. Just seeing the repercussions of this world creature getting sick. And so that's a setting, but also a call to adventure for your PCs to go out and figure out what it is that's killing this world beast.
Yeah, that's a fun idea. I mean, I think you can, if it's not going to be an entire world beast, I think you can shrink it down smaller too, and you could have like maybe islands in your world are made up this way, right? And so one island gets sick and starts to die, and these people move to a different island and start to inhabit that one with people that are already existing there, and they tell them like, yeah, we moved here because the island that we had, things just started dying. But maybe it's so large that people don't know that the islands are actually creatures, that these are on the back of. And all of a sudden the same disease starts to happen on this island, and the stories that these people were telling when they came here, now they're starting to see, and it's like, okay, something's weird about this. Like, we don't know why that's happening. Or the people that were coming to the island are then kicked off the island by the people that inhabited it already, because they're like, no, you guys are cursed. Get out of here. Like, this is not something that's good for us. We didn't do anything to deserve this. You brought this with you, you know? So I think there's a bunch of like fun little aspects. Maybe that's how they realize that the islands are on the backs of creatures, is because they start to figure these things out, or they start to find their way underneath, you know, the island. They're doing some diving things to see if they can figure something out, and they discover this is a massive turtle that this land is on. I think there's some fun opportunities there for them.
Well, the other thing I was thinking, obviously using a creature like this, most likely your timelines are very long. And so then that's why people that live there don't really understand what's happening. But what if there's a younger one? And so as one dies, another one kind of takes its place. But then you're still doing that same concept of like, well, we have to move over there, but who can move over there? Is it large enough? Is it not? But that's just how the ecology of the world works. And that's terrifying.
That's so crazy. Yeah, that's crazy to think of, like, creating, whether it's like they discover that that's what's happening, or they know that from legends. And so now they're building these Spelljammer-esque airships, right? Because they got to travel through the cosmos, because the great turtle is going to give birth, and that smaller world turtle is going to be floating out in the cosmos, and they have to get to it. They have to escape their world turtle to get to the other one. Oh man, yeah, like some evacuation airships.
Yeah, I think that's disturbingly disgusting all at the same time. But then it's like, who gets to go? Like, does the governments decide that? But then you're not just bringing like technology with you that will work the same. Like, you're going to have to become super primitive again and try and figure all these things out, because maybe all of the same natural resources that you had been using are no longer available, and the technology that you have is no longer sustainable. You know,
I feel like there's a, like, you could tell it as a like allegory of how we as humans have like messed up the earth, like taking like natural resources, right? You could totally be like, sit back after the campaign and be like, let's have a discussion based off of this campaign. But
yeah, I think that's a fun idea, Mitch. I'm excited. What's your number 9 for us?
So my number 9 comes off of the idea of, you know, we have a lot of listeners who have listened to our show and been, before they listened to this show, or after they started listening to the show, creating their own homebrew worlds. And I have to imagine that not everyone out there has been like, like, I'm totally cool with creating one homebrew world and just sticking to that. Like, probably there are some listeners who have created multiple worlds. Maybe they've engaged in multiverse adventures. And so this one's called Bridge of Worlds. And if you want to create a new setting, a new world with different races, different continents, whatever it is, but this is a idea for a setting that bridges those two worlds. And so maybe you can introduce that new world through your already established world. And so that's a window in the air appears, or it's created, revealing an entirely different world. And then the city that world window is near, they start the construction of a bridge to go through that window to the other world and to explore. And that can be the beginning of a campaign where you take characters from one world and bring them into a new one for the ultimate exploration campaign.
That is terrifying. So I'm trying to think when there's different ways. I mean, so it's whatever the person wants to think. So I will say how I think of it, because a lot of times when this is used, it's like you look up and it's basically a city pointing down at you. I think a more interesting way to do it that kind of turns that on its head is that there is literally a window set in the sky. And the easy way to differentiate is that when it's day, it's night. When it's night, it's day. And so you can't see what's there. Yeah. You don't see terrain. You don't see people. So, and then the idea of a more traditional style bridge being built and then finally getting high enough to see into this window. Oh, and then what do you find?
Yeah. I mean, my mind immediately went to what's on the inside of it. You know, I mean, there's so much possibility there. You could almost like create an entire, so this is where my mind went. The inside of there, it's like a journey from one place to the other, like almost like a platformer sort of game where there's very defined parameters in which you can go, and you know. But in there, I like the idea of there being either like one big town that you have to stop to along the way, or one small town where there's a species of creatures that only live in these bridge between two worlds. Mm-hmm. I don't know what they could be. Like, it could be something fun that you create on your own who have adapted to it. But, you know, I think that could be something that's really fun. Like these entire species of people that you meet for the first time and you never see them anywhere else ever because they only live in this kind of time and space between worlds. But you could also mess with time as well. Like when you go one direction, does time speed up? But you don't know that it's sped up because you're going to a different world that doesn't operate the same way.
Time doesn't work the same. Yeah, it's slower there or it's faster there. Yep.
Yeah, you have no reference. You have no point of reference. You just come out, you know, and it's, hey, we're in this new place. But when you go back, does it speed up again or does it slow down on the way back, or, you know?
Yeah, when you come back, did you lose time, or was it like, what do you mean you've been gone for 3 years? You literally just left.
Right, because there's always that element of exploration where you have to lose something, right? Like you always lose time if you travel into the wilderness that you could be spending with family or friends or whatever. So I don't know why traveling between multiverses wouldn't be any different, you know? Yeah. So adding that time element in there. But it also gives you the ability for time to either move faster, or does one of these time rewind for you? You know, that could be really interesting too. Like you get to now go back and you have information about things that are going to happen in your world that haven't yet happened because you already lived them, but because of this travel, things have moved backwards in time. That there's so many fun things that you could do with what happens when they travel in between the two places.
Yeah, you brought up meeting a new race entirely, and that's something that kind of spurred this idea because, you know, in creating Atos, my own homebrew world, there have been times where there'll be a race that comes out through, whether it's like an official D&D book or through like something that Kobold Press makes or something, and I'm like, oh, that's a cool race, but I don't know if I like the idea of them being part of the world of Atos. Like, but I feel sad that, like, you know, if I feel that way, then that's not going to be a race that we're going to explore or a creature that we're going to explore in my world. And this kind of like literally opens the door to explore those things and be like, but it's a different world. And so now you can have those interactions, and it kind of still allows you to be like, I don't see them fitting into my world that I've created, but why not a different world that I'm going to create?
Obviously, it's trolls. They live under a bridge. So clearly, it's an intelligent race of trolls.
It has to be trolls. Well, and then you could have the trolls. Like, I was just thinking more about the time aspect. They could almost be like timekeepers. So like you could ask them to do either speed up time or slow down time for you while you're going through this. But it requires you to do something for them in the land that you're going to travel to. You know, you have to get them a certain amount of resources so they can survive in this bridge because they can't leave. You know.
Yeah, all I'm picturing now is trolls in tuxedos with monocles and top hats, and I'm enthralled with this idea, and I don't know how we got here from a bridge of worlds.
Yeah.
But that's fantastic.
All right, let's see how we can screw up your number 8 idea, Mitch.
All right, so my number 8 I entitled Plague of the Feywild. So we all know that creatures of the Feywild are like these extreme emotion-based creatures. So like red caps are just filled with rage and murderous bloodlust. You have pixies that are chaotic and love to pull pranks. And I came up with this idea that a plague has spread from the Feywild into the material plane. And what's happening is those who are contracting this plague, the people and creatures that are, whether it's like some, in my mind, I'm picturing pixie dust like spreading across the fields, right? But that they're breathing it in, they're contracting this disease, this plague, they start to turn into agents of their most prevalent emotion or personality trait. And so the world around you is falling into chaos because of that. That shopkeeper who's kind of greedy, he's becoming a complete and total creature of greed now. That warrior, that barbarian that's filled with rage is becoming like a Hulk-like monstrosity because this plague is affecting him. And the idea that I think that I really like about this as like an adventure is the idea of having your PCs become infected and throwing it out to them to be like, listen, like I'm not going to tell you how fast or how slow you're getting sick. I'd like that to be something that you control and you decide what emotion and what changes you're going through, but like to really give them the agency to play through that and see what creatures they become and do their physical appearances change because of that as well.
It's like a terrifying Star Trek episode.
I wouldn't know. I've never seen that Star Trek
episode. It works really well because you could also have a player that lacks emotion. Mm-hmm. In the case of Star Trek The Next Generation, Data ends up being the one that's kind of still and they're still there. So if you had a character that plays more emotionless, that maybe they're taking longer. Like you said, you have a barbarian who's just, I'm in. And aka Worf, obviously, and in that episode they start turning into creatures. I would probably lean a little bit away from that because I don't know how fast I would want to tip my hand of it's the Feywild. Mm-hmm. And so letting it be a thing that really plays on emotion rather than like there's also trees everywhere and things like that. So for me, I would probably stay away from that.
Yeah, well, and that's totally up to you as the DM, right? Like, and how fast that starts to change. Because I do picture it being, at first, it's just lashing out with different emotions, just being extreme. Like, dude, calm down. Like, you're so mad today. Like, take a chill pill. Like, but then eventually maybe you start to see little red dots on their skin or something, and they're going through these changes. But maybe by then you've even figured out what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gives like a ton of potential plot hooks. Like maybe because this is from the Feywild, they try all of like the methods the local apothecaries know to try and heal this. They try all of the, crazy cleric spells of healing, but nothing's working because it's something from the Feywild specific. Mm-hmm. That then people have to go on an adventure to get a specific ingredient that only grows in the Feywild that can help curb this,
Yeah.
And then you have a whole bunch of crazy fun that happens in the Feywild because of, there's crazy things that happen there that don't happen in the normal material plane.
Yeah. Or maybe the adventure is to go to the Shadowfell, which is like, you're going to the opposite of the Feywild because you've got to bring back something that is going to dampen.
You have to release a different disease on the planet to level everybody out again.
That could be a crazy moral choice of like, this could work or this could backfire on us. Is this the choice we're going to make, or are we going to keep looking, even though we know back at home chaos is ensuing?
Yeah. Planet-altering decisions made by 4 players who aren't in control of any government in the world. That sounds like a great idea.
Or their own emotions.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, they're not going to be in complete control. Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah, I think that's a fun idea. So, Mitch, what is your number 7 then for us?
So my number 7 is entitled Dangerous Knowledge. So a while ago, I came across lore surrounding Dungeons and Dragons about, and I don't know if either of you guys are familiar with this. Neal, you've been playing way longer than either of us have, so I assume you probably have, but around 10th level magical spells. And so this idea is that around the world, ancient tombs containing powerful 10th level magical spells are being found. These spells are of godlike power levels, but each time one of these spells is cast, the universe pays a price. So I'm thinking kind of like tears in the fabric of reality every time one of these godlike level spells is being used. But of course, there are going to be people out there finding these tombs, and that's not going to be their concern. Their concern is going to be rise to power. So that's kind of a setting idea that I feel like, you could change how your world is being affected with just these tombs that start to pop up everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it almost sounds like there's like a magical arms race that's starting at that point, that you're trying to, like all of the countries of the world are trying to either, one, figure out how to combat against these things, or two, are sending people out to find them either for nefarious reasons or because they want to store them and not have them ever be used. I think there's that element of it. I also think like this could be where your bridge idea comes in. Like every time one of those is created, like one of those windows opens as well, and you have no idea what's going to happen, but because it was so powerful, it tore a rift in the fabric of, the planes, and now because you cast a 10th level spell, who knows what's on the other side? It could be something far more dangerous,
Oh yeah, it could be another city that wants to like trade with you. It could be the sky opens and demons start flooding out. Exactly.
Totally. Yeah, and that could be the repercussion of it. You just don't know what happens because these 10th level spells are being cast. But then it's also like, what happens with your players if they get their hands on one of these things?
Yes.
Like,
especially
do
the
they? Well, yeah. If they've been contracted by a government to go and collect it, do they bring it back? Do they decide to put it on the black market somehow, or do they decide to use it for themselves in some either good or bad ways? Like when you put anything of immense power in front of players, you have no idea what's going to happen.
At the very least that it's a carrot on a string, and that some of them are thinking, I want to take it.
Yeah, I want to do it. I want to see what happens.
Yeah, I looked up 10th level spells while we were talking.
Yeah.
Good man. Even interesting things that aren't quite game breaking right out the gate. So Conduit, where you literally open into the positive or negative material plane to pull forth magic, and you do it with another wizard for another wizard, boosting their power. It says at triple power is what their spells are cast at, and they will not forget things currently memorized. Also, you could double the magic of a magic item by doing this.
Yeah, they're so powerful. Like the spells in themselves can be world breaking, but in my mind, it's that overuse of the arcane that it's going to have repercussions even beyond the spell. But I love the way that Chris described it as like a magical arms race, because you would absolutely have like countries that would be worried about another country and how they have just cast the spell, and their answer would be like, while we don't like using this spell, we must do it in order to put an end to this other country using this spell, and the world would be in a lot of danger because of that.
Totally.
Yeah. The idea that it would also take amount of as well, and even looking at it from hiring the players to be the people that go get the resources necessary to be able to maybe cast the spell.
Well, and what happens if a resource is wrong, right? Like, oh, we got the blue crystal, but we were supposed to get the red crystal, but then you cast the spell anyway. Does nothing happen, or does something even more crazy happen. Spell failure on a 10th level spell level.
Something called
Yeah,
Deity Bind, where you literally link your life force with the power of a chosen god.
Yes, I saw
There,
that one.
even if you choose a major god, there's a 55% chance it will work. Also, if you or the god die, you both die when it happens.
Oh, geez.
Well, now the gods are
Gosh.
getting involved in what's happening in the material plane to a degree that they weren't before. Like, it's now you have gods worried about mortals. Yeah.
Well,
doing
and
these
the idea,
kinds of
it says
things.
here, there are also those religious, there are also those that will seek out a god-linked individual to kill them, hopefully eliminating a rival god.
So many things could go horribly wrong with this, and I love it. I love it.
Oh, we know you do, Chris, because we remember your top 10.
Oh, I know. They're good. Yeah, so Mitch, what is your number 6 for us?
My number 6 is actually something that I actually ran for my players for the first time, and it's a continued adventure. The idea of the unending dungeon, a magically created dungeon that has absolutely no end. Adventurers go as far as they can, collecting loot and getting stronger as they go. When they eventually die, a new room is created where they are that room's boss battle. So any adventurers that die in this dungeon, they become part of it and they become another obstacle, so that if this is something that you want to create to run players through, if you play with players that have already played in it, they're going to know that eventually they're going to come to that character that they created a while back as a boss. Or even like playing with new players and being able to be like, yeah, that boss that you just defeated, that was this person's character from another playthrough that we went through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. I like that idea a lot because anytime you can bring back old players' characters, it's always, especially if they're still in the campaigns with you in the future, it's always just fun to watch their face light up. Yeah. And to know, like, you and I both do epilogue nights, but It could be one of those things that, like, a character went through this dungeon that you didn't realize went through this dungeon afterwards, or a party that
their ending
went
was
through.
ambiguous, so you kind of have that freedom.
Yeah, their ending was ambiguous, or it could be one of those things that, like, maybe their character did die, but we never explained what the afterlife was like. And for adventurers, this is one of the options that they have in the afterlife.
Oh,
and
man,
so,
that'd be cool.
And so every adventure party gets to see how far they go once they are all dead.
Yeah, maybe you have to reach this level of prestige to get to it, but in the afterlife, certain adventurers will be able to get to this never-ending dungeon. Yeah.
Which could be a really fun way just to be like, and now this is where we get to rest. And like maybe their characters don't spend all day every day, but like they're called upon when somebody finally does make it that far into the dungeon again, that they're just like zapped back there, and now they have to do their dungeon quest, as a part of their afterlife responsibilities.
Yeah, it'd be cool to tie it into a god specifically. Like I'm thinking like Vikings are all about Valhalla. Like I imagine like a certain battle or dungeon delving type god, the characters that worship that god, like that's their idea of the afterlife. If they follow that god well, that they will in the afterlife get to go through this dungeon and then eventually become part of this dungeon of the afterlife, this unending dungeon. Like what a cool idea of a quote unquote heaven for a character to be constantly like yearning for when they pass on.
Right.
Yeah, the idea of making it, I would also, trying to think of the right words, because you want to tie it back to certain mechanics in 5th edition. So I would definitely use the term plane. And that way you can do planar travel or plane shift or things like that to get players there or potentially get players out. And the idea that it is certainly this heaven kind of situation for certain creatures, but then also having the players' ability to go like in and out whenever they want.
I like the idea too of, you have that saying that we say here that it's like, oh, you can't take it with you. But to this type of character, like their thinking is like, no, absolutely. Every piece of loot and magical equipment I will be taking with me to my final dungeon delve, and whatever I collect there will become part of me as I become part of the dungeon as well. Like that they're going to be kind of like, yeah, no, this sword that I have, this magical sword that I can throw in return, like that's going to go with me to the afterlife as I go through the dungeon.
Okay, we have to talk about it. Would it exist in both places? And the idea
like
that
the material plane and heaven,
and the idea that you go and there's this character going through this dungeon and they go to swing their sword and it's gone because someone has raided the tomb.
Oh gosh.
oh man.
And that, but the reverse concept is potentially true because you're just sitting there and they pick up a new sword and it shows up on the material plane.
Yeah, that leads to more like religious ways that people are like, when I die, I need to be buried in a tomb. It needs to be sealed tightly. Like if people take my sword, I'm not going to have it in the eternal dungeon. Like, so yeah, like burial is really important to these worshipers of this god in this dungeon. Yeah, that's interesting.
And what qualifies as item? I'm thinking of so many things. Like, is there basically a way that you can now communicate? Because you can send things back and forth, if you will. Is it like we're watching The Lake House with Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock? I mean, pretty much.
This is not the turn I thought we were going to.
Nope, but I had to. So we should probably move on to the next idea after my terrible statement.
Yeah, this is number 5, right?
Yeah, so my number 5, so this is the one, Chris, that I had to change because I recognize that my idea was pretty much on par with your idea about the gods creating this arena battle, right? Like for mortals. And so, and we talked about that and we kind of riffed and I realized that the ideas that I threw out about your top 10 were completely from my top 10. So I was like, oh, I need to change this completely. So, but we're sticking with that idea that the gods are creating this arena battle, but I'm going to take it a step further and say that the most powerful beings of each universe, because I've entitled this the Tournament of the Multiverse, have been summoned by the gods to do battle. The prize for the winners is the continuation of their chosen universe. And so you're bringing together all different characters from different multiverses into one place to do battle. Maybe it's like this world in between worlds. And if you win, your universe continues. If you lose, your universe is destroyed.
Show me what you got.
Now, okay, so speaking of TV shows, I mentioned it during Chris's last top 10, but this is 100% influenced from Dragon Ball Z Super.
100%.
The plot of this.
Totally.
I wasn't sure. Yeah, I knew Chris said he hadn't watched it, but I love that idea, and I love the idea of, like, with the multiverse, imagine having your players. I think this would be a great adventure at the end of an adventure. You've gone with these characters and you go, okay, now what is the next step? We've finished the campaign. They've become really powerful. Now you take them to this multiverse battle. And on the other side, maybe there's a team that looks just like the PCs, but they're like a dark version of them, evil universe side, or like they've chosen differently, so they have different power sets and having to battle yourself from a different multiverse.
I also don't want the people that were in the battle to die. So let's say they lose and their universe is destroyed. But then in kind of this twisted way, the gods don't want to kill these super powerful people, obviously, for the next time they want to do this. So they all just get dumped into the surviving universe.
The one universe.
Because you could still continue the story and how the RP behind we've lost our universe, but we're still here.
Well, some of them would be filled with hate and want to kill the winners. In fact, probably multiple of the losers would want to do that.
Or figure out a way to get all the Dragon Balls and wish back that, or figure out a way to try and undo it or seek revenge, not because other players could see it as they won, but that's not their fault. We weren't in this situation because the winners chose for us to be. We need to figure out how to topple this cabal of deities so that they don't do this to someone else.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part of like, especially if the winners are like, yeah, this is great and all, but this also stinks for millions and millions and millions of people. So how do we now then prevent the gods from doing this ever again? Almost as a sense of like, we can't take this back. We're really sorry about this. We didn't know that this was going to happen, but we'll work our hardest to prevent this from happening to anybody else in the future. I think is a really interesting way of going about dealing with what happened because you won.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean I can't say it enough. Dragon Ball Super, if you haven't seen it and this is an idea that interests you, watch it because it'll give you great ideas. I just imagine the role-playing opportunities of you're having these PCs role-played by players, and especially if they're good characters with good hearts, like having to fight for their universe, knowing that every time they take down an enemy, it's another universe that might potentially then be destroyed because of it.
Yeah.
Like the toll that's going to have as they're going through this battle. And yes, they may be winning, but in a very different way, they're not.
Yeah, loads of potential there for crazy things to happen. And then you get the one person that's like bent on destroying the entire universe, and this is the easy way for him.
Which they're obviously going to do by working together to get a 10th level spell.
That will then
open
a
freezer right there.
Yeah. Oh, man. All right, Mitch, what is your number 4 for us?
My number 4 is actually something that you could tie into, especially with Neal's idea of number 5 and taking all of the champions, and even the losers that were part of that battle and putting them into one world. Because my number 4 is drafted by the gods. The gods are at war, and they have chosen the material plane for their battleground. Some gods fight, and mankind is little more than insignificant casualties. But some gods are recruiting mortals to their cause.
What are they doing with them?
Yeah, so
using them as the army or agents among. I've always liked the idea of god weapons, and so I'm imagining gods granting mortals these god weapons and sending them off to assassinate other gods.
Infinity Blade.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But I just imagine like what happens after all of the war is done. Like if gods just start going mad and start handing out all of these powerful weapons and items and now it's done and over with, like do the weapons disappear or do now all of these people just have items, Or instead of 10th level spells, were these people when they died buried with their weapons, and now those are the things that are starting to resurface again in the future, tying that back in to another one of your top 10s.
Well, and I think that this would be a good a good idea if you wanted to take this top 10 idea and run with it, to listen to, I don't remember the exact episode, but the episode on Death of a God with Aram that we had, because we had so many good ideas about that. And if you're being part of a god army and you destroy another god, that god dies, and that god is the god of the forest. Do then all the forests start to die? Or then the other question of, like, can somebody then take up that god's mantle and become that god? There's all these repercussions, and certainly this war of gods that your PCs are now recruited into should have consequences that are world-altering and universe-altering, good and bad.
I'm trying to remember if it was one of our previous top 10s where we talked about the idea that there was just this spear that showed up outside.
Yeah, that was
town.
mine.
Okay,
that was one of my ideas.
Just that idea falls in really well, and then also like who's attached, maybe at this point, going off of your idea, to that spear. And so then they just show up and they start recruiting people very specifically.
Yeah, that could be like the shot heard around the world, right? Mm-hmm. The first spear thrown in this God's War, and that little town where maybe your PCs are at, they're just like, what the heck? What's going on here? And then from there, it starts to become clear that the gods are fighting, and they start coming into your little town, and some of them are recruiting, and it could be a good catalyst event.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
That's great. So, Mitch, tell us about your number 3.
My number 3 is entitled The Darkness Below. A curse falls upon the world, and the surface of the planet is covered with a deadly mist. Go watch the movie The Mist, I guess.
Yeah,
right. Not the TV show. Civilization had to move to the skies. Airships, gargantuan golems with cities on their backs. This is now where mortals live and fear what lies below.
Yeah, my mind is like running wild with like, why is the mist there? Or is
why is it dangerous? Is it poison?
Yeah.
Right.
Are there creatures within it that like are just so ridiculous? Like, so can adventurers in this world go down to the surface and survive for a certain amount of time? Maybe there's jobs that adventurers have to do to go to the surface to bring back materials, but it's just such a dangerous place. Or is it completely you can't go down because it's just like it's just so deadly you'll die as soon as you go down there.
Yeah, I mean my general thought is like I don't like the idea of it being poisonous. I like the adventure aspect of like still being able to go down there. And so, is it like something from the Underdark has leaked out and now like all of these creatures that they didn't know about down below the depths of the earth are now able to come out, and that's why, because they can't see anything because it's so dark and so foggy that they can't see anything, but these creatures are able to just run wild. And so people either have to create ways to disperse the fog to go and get materials real quick, or they have to just by trial and error figure out when the safest times to go into the fog are to get what they need and bring it back to either the floating islands or the golems or whatever sorts of ways they're now living above the surface.
I don't know if this is scientifically accurate, but we've all heard that idea of certain fish will grow to a size that will fit their environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like with
Yeah,
the fish
goldfish
tank
do
and things
that.
like that. So like, so it is. Like,
Yeah, a
it's
lot
true.
of
like if you take
a lot of fish will. Yeah, so
throw
like Oscar, which is a really common one, like based on the size of your tank.
Obviously, there's a limit, right?
Yes.
Like, they're not just gonna. But
Yeah, totally,
So
yeah.
with that idea and with what you just presented, Chris, like now I'm imagining like in this dystopian world, adventurers going down to the dark mist covered surface, and a beholder being this gargantuan beholder coming at them, right? Because maybe that's part of the Underdark, was that beholders were the size they were, but now having freedom on the surface world, they have grown and mutated to be 100 eye stalk beholders that are like ginormous inside. So
this picture that I have in my head is just of like a beholder submarine that like can't stay out in the light for too long.
Yes.
But like all of a sudden you'll just see one eye stalk pop up above the
Yes.
mist and like look around, see if there's
oh,
any
that's great.
people coming, and then go back down underneath. But like you could have creatures that do that all the time. Like you could have like, for example, if you had a big worm all of a sudden, like a purple worm or something that now is not confined by the space that it's in.
A world
but
worm.
you see like part of its back like crest over the fog, and you're like on this floating island like, nope, not a good time to go down right now, because you're seeing all of these creatures that are like barely breaking through the fog now because they're not constrained by the limits of the Underdark. That's terrifying.
There lies a job that adventurers have to go down, because if the city on the back of the golem needs to go somewhere, well, these giant world worms are creating holes in the planet, and we don't want, like, we can't see the ground because of the mist, so we have to go down and make sure that there's not a giant worm created hole in front of the golem that he falls into and the whole entire city is destroyed. So just like making sure that the way is clear for the golem city to walk because of creatures that are wreaking havoc upon the planet.
Yeah.
Jeez. Also, I just thought about like 20-foot tall drow, but then I was like, no, that's dumb.
Oh gosh.
But 20-foot tall mind flayers, giant mind flayers.
Yeah,
now that
Gosh.
is a different story.
Terrible idea. Put it back in your brain.
So, Mitch, what is your number 2 for us?
So my number 2 is actually a campaign that I really would like to play at point in the future for my own world, and I have called it the world before the world. So the question here is, if you have a homebrew world, what was your world? Was there a world before the current state of the world? Like, how did your world come about? Was it created by the gods? And was it just nothingness before? Because if the answer is yes, it was just nothingness, then maybe this one isn't for you. But what was the world like before the current world came into existence? So for my world, the gods came and they shaped the world of Atos into what it is, created the mortal races. But before they got there, the world was this completely devastated place that was a war zone between giants and dragons. And so when they got there, the giants had all but lost the war, and the entire world was covered in ash and covered in dragons. And so the new gods coming in, they chased all these dragons away. So I would love to play a campaign where my players, unbeknownst to them, are playing giants in this world before, and have there be a reveal somewhere along the line that they are giants and they're fighting dragons constantly, and that this is Atos before Atos came to be. What are you guys' thoughts on, obviously it doesn't have to be that specific way, but a world before the world type of campaign or setting?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about what was there before, like, because it sounds like you're talking about what was there before the humanoid races of like the world that, you know, we normally think of. But I think it'd be interesting, like, no matter what your what's the word I'm looking for? Like, if you were to take your example for what you have, if all of a sudden, like, because I know you have a multiverse, if somebody from a different universe, like sometime later, traveled here, and then they were like the small people in the midst of dragons and Goliath and giant races, and like either the giants or the dragons are trying to recruit them because they're so small and undetectable to like do the dirty work for them, you know, like that could be really interesting, I think, to play that sort of campaign.
Well, it makes me think of that old Twilight Zone episode where you have the person, well, whatever, if you haven't seen it, I'm gonna spoil like a 50-year-old Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah, I think you're saying.
Yeah, but basically there's this weird small astronaut, and it seems like these normal-sized people are battling it, only to come to find out that it was like a U.S. crashed spaceship that landed on this world of giants. So it's all about perspective. Because the other thing I thought was that you were going to tell... Well, the other thing I thought was that it was going to be the players are the gods reshaping the world.
That would be another cool way to go through it.
Because again, it's all about perspective when you're looking at a world that exists in a different way. The other one I thought was that it was going to be like Froopy Land from Rick and Morty, but I was like, not a chance. But I think it's a really, really cool way, especially if you needed like a one shot, and maybe it was a one shot that really helped explain the origin of the world that was helpful for the campaign that you're in. And of course, it could be an entire campaign. But I like that. I like that a lot, especially with, I think a big thing for me is having that reveal of like, oh yeah, you guys are actually giants. Wait, what?
Right.
And even you guys have added like all these different like ways you could go with it, and you guys brought in like these sci-fi elements, and now I'm like wondering if the PCs like they travel through time, whether they know it or they don't know it, and I feel like don't know is even more interesting. And all of a sudden, like I think Chris, you were the one that said like, what if they like get recruited by the giants, and you have these small, like the giants could see these warriors as like these amazing assassins that can sneak into places that they can't. But then like as you're playing, maybe you come across some sort of monument or something. Now I'm thinking like Planets of the Apes, like where they come across the Statue of Liberty, only it would be like in reverse, right? Like that it like this is before this thing was destroyed, this old ruin in your world that everybody's familiar with, but it's at the peak of its glory. It's beautiful, it's new, and this reveal of like we are not in the same time. I guess you could do this whole thing in reverse order too, and do the world after the world. What kind of like apocalypse happened that changes your world, and maybe thousands of years tens of thousands of years, millions of years later, what does your world look like? Has it redeveloped? Which makes me think of the Time Machine book and movie that kind of deals with that. But
yeah, I think there's also that, the world before the world and the world after the world. Either of those are fascinating potential places. I mean, you could pull in some like old Gamma World stuff to try and do some post-apocalyptic stuff. And I think there's no shortage of possibilities for that.
And so you just have that reveal planned out that you weren't plane hopping, you weren't traveling to a different plane of existence, which might be, you might throw it out there as that's kind of what everybody's thinking, but then later on you find out that it is the same world, it is the same plane, but it's before or after a long time from when your PCs are used to.
Totally.
I like it.
And I could think of ways to like keep that kind of building up to that campaign. For myself, I've added into campaigns that we've played through little like hints, I guess, or whatever you would call it, Easter eggs, where the players will come across a giant skeleton that is far larger than any giant that they've ever come across. And so just introducing little elements throughout your campaigns to this ultimate campaign that you want to play in the future could be pretty cool, because eventually when you play that, all the players might go, oh man, like I remember we came across that thing and it made no sense to us at that time,
and now it totally
and
does.
now it does.
And how to not metagame at the same time. All right, Mitch, last one. Blow us away with your number one.
All right, well, here it goes. My number one is Memories of the Fallen, and it's kind of a little bit like the last one, exploring memories of fallen people, civilizations, histories in your world. I thought of this idea of whether you give your PCs an adventure where they need to collect history and knowledge that has been forgotten for whatever reason it is, maybe to avoid an upcoming catastrophe to the world, to stop history from happening again. Your PCs have been given this power to see old memories of fallen heroes or old memories of even fallen monsters or the history of objects like ruins. And so your campaign could be a whole bunch of one-shots where they're traveling and going to the tomb of a fallen hero, and they use their power, and then they are put into the memory and they take over the persona of past heroes of your world, playing through different timelines. And what I think is really cool is you could even bring back old PCs and let your players play either their old PCs or PCs that like their friend next to them played. Because that would be the cool thing of like, oh my gosh, like you start describing this old PC and the one player who got to play them at one point is like, oh cool, and then you point and you're like, and you the person next to him, you're playing that character in this story. But to be able to play through old timelines, old histories, and see how things go, which interact with, I mean, you have to give your players agency, so that might end up being the way that the campaign goes, because your players play through the history and reveal how the history went as you go.
I think that's really, really fun, especially because, let's be honest, if there's anyone that has the old character sheets, it's probably you as the DM. In fact, let's be honest, it's probably the person who has the new character sheets, because I don't trust a handful of my players. And the other thing I thought was figuring out how that looks. Admittedly, last night I watched Frozen 2, and there's an element where Elsa is in like the memories and seeing how that looks. Or the other thing I thought was Guardians of the Galaxy. And I feel like Star-Lord had something, and then it kind of showed how the world looked before, but it's all the ruins as he's trying to find the orb that had the Infinity Stone in it. So I think figuring out what it looks like is a really fun element as well. I mean, and it could just look like they're actually there, and there's nothing different than if they were right down the way.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking like you could do a campaign in the same timeline that has nothing to do with the other campaign that already happened, but you still like that ruler's name sounds familiar. Why does that sound familiar? You know? And then you're in a town and it's like, oh, you see, you know, like we used to do the Riders of Shemesh. You see like a vest of the Riders of Shemesh and you're like, what's happening here? You know?
Yeah, you drop that, you slowly give that reveal so people start picking up. But yeah, and then you finally have a big reveal, whether it's a PC of the past or an NPC or whatever it is. Yeah.
Or is it like they're on the opposite side during this time, you know? And like you're trying to counteract everything that happened in the other one, you know, to see if you can even possibly undo it in some way.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, you could literally find the tomb of a past villain and play through that as like the villain and his closest henchmen or a monster or something like that, and play through storylines of that. What I like about it too is it could get, if you're giving the players agency to like set these like new stories and these new histories, like I feel like it really lets your players be a part of the world building for you. Kind of like if you go back to the other idea where Chris, you had the idea of the players playing the gods coming in, and then going, all right, what? I mean, this would have to probably be without a predetermined map, but if they were then able to create the world as they saw fit, you're really giving your players a lot of agency to create a world the way that they want to create the world and the histories.
It doesn't even have to be that far in the past, because it could be that they step into an area where this large battle just happened. And so then they're reliving that memory, and then you basically jump back to where you are, and the choices that they made are affecting what they're seeing now. And so then, because like you said, the farther they go back, depending on where they go and what they're doing, there's only so much they can do without like changing everything that's already happening.
Well, I guess that's a good question to ask is, are they replaying through a memory, something that's already predetermined, even though the players have agency, like this is how it happened, or are they changing events of the past? Because if they're changing events of the past, that opens a new door of when a PC of that campaign falls, can they use this power on that PC to change the past to lead up to the point where something different happens and that PC does not lose their life?
Oh, that's a tough one. You get whatever your time travel rules are, make them and stick to them. Because that's
stick to them, just like every movie does.
That's the only thing. Is it doesn't matter what your rules are, as long as you stick to them.
That's not true. Some of them are just terrible.
Okay, no. That's just my bare minimum. It's my bare minimum, and no one's doing it.
Do
okay,
not stick to the rules.
I don't care how bad they are. Please follow them. You set them. Yeah. What are we doing?
Well, sweet, Mitch, we did it. We got through your top 10.
Yeah.
And we got through all 3 of our top 10s. It's awesome.
Yes, 30 new ideas.
Yeah, crazy.
Unless we did some repeats, which might have happened.
For sure. Just a reminder to everyone that we are going to do an AMA, so stay tuned for that. Be sure to get your questions in on Twitter or through email. We'll be sure. It doesn't have to just be about what we normally talk about. It can be about anything in life. So we want to be able to do that for you guys, to be able to be sure to get those in. Neal, if our listeners want to get in touch with us, how would they do that?
You can find me at my house no, I'm just kidding. You can always email us at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com. And of course, if you like this episode or any of the others and you see fit, head over to your podcatcher of choice and leave us a 5-star review, which we'll read on air.
You can follow us on Twitter at DMS_block. That's at DMsBlock. Or you can like our Facebook page. Both of those places are great places to go if you want to keep yourself knowledgeable about the updates that are happening with the show.
The Dungeon Masters Block is a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network, where you can check out other shows like Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, Geek Wars, and more.
Well, that's it. Thanks for listening to the Dungeon Masters Block, the place where we come to talk about the most important person in the game, the Dungeon Master, the only person capable of playing God,
killing characters,
and lowering the ego of everyone else at the table.
And Neal, I'm taking it back from you. Have a good night, everyone.
All right. You stay classy, blockheads.
And keep on dungeon mastering.
It's not inspiration, it's not wisdom, and it's bad advice.
To help balance magic items in the game, if it's not on the mini, it's not in your inventory.
Goodbye.